We acknowledge the ancestors, elders, families of the Kulin Nation who are the traditional landowners of University Land. We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of this land. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Viewers are advised that this content may contain references to deceased persons, historical events, and cultural practices that could be distressing. Some material may also discuss the impact of colonization, including trauma and discrimination. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Today, our group will be discussing suicide amongst Indigenous youth. Suicide among Indigenous peoples is a result of poor mental health and a lack of awareness and understanding from a historical context. It is a complex phenomenon that incorporates many aspects. It needs to be understood in the context of loss of land and culture, colonization, intergenerational trauma, racism, discrimination, grief, loss, and trauma, all of which will be further discussed, including programs that have been both successful and unsuccessful in combating the issue at hand.
The health issue that we have decided to discuss is suicide within the youth. We have chosen this issue because the rates of death due to suicide in the Indigenous community are significantly higher than non Indigenous peoples, and it's in the top 10 of leading causes of death. These differences are proven to be because of the colonization and its aftermath, including intergenerational trauma in the Indigenous population. Indigenous people often face several challenges that may play a part for heightened suicide. The challenges that the youth may have been faced with are discrimination, unemployment, poverty, and inequalities in the health system. Additionally, mental health challenges, including depression and substance use, are common among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and may contribute to an increased risk of suicide and self harm. With the lack of support to the youth, they may think that suicide is a possible solution to life challenges. Studies have reported that Indigenous youth were between 4 and 14 times likely to die from suicide than their non Indigenous peers. This graph demonstrates the death rates due to intentional self harm among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and non Indigenous people from 2014 to 2018. Specifically, from the ages 15 to 24, there were approximately 40.5 deaths per 100,000 people, whereas the rate for non-Indigenous individuals in the same age group was 11.7 deaths per 100,000 people. This indicates that the rate of self-harm in this group was approximately 3.5 times higher among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders compared to non-Indigenous people. In 2018, suicide was the second leading cause of death for male Aboriginal peoples, and for females, it was the seventh leading cause. The data that has been displayed proves that suicide prevention is extremely vital for improving life outcomes in the Indigenous community.
You stole our land, our people, our spirit, our language, our law, more or less our everything. Liz Jarrett. When you see the stuff happening, like the forced closure of Aboriginal communities, death in custody of Aboriginal children being stolen from their families, it's just hard to be okay when everything around you is not okay. Yaraman Connell. We can talk about why I became an alcoholic. I couldn't handle what had happened to my family or to myself. I wanted to feel peaceful. I got nothing from them. I got a screwed up mind from them. James M. Walsh. In an episode that aired in 2016 of You Can't Ask That, a diverse group of Indigenous peoples were asked a series of questions which only highlighted how the long-term impacts of colonizations continues to affect the mental well-being of generations of Indigenous communities today. From the beginning of colonizations, the Indigenous community were devastated by introduced diseases, land disposition, and the destruction of their traditional ways of life. Despite the levels of loss of life being astonishingly high, there was little to no medical assistance provided. In 1837, the British government introduced the Protection Policy. The aim of this policy was to control and segregate Aboriginal peoples rather than to support them. Aboriginal peoples were forced to live in established reserves and missions. These policies were justified as a way to prevent the spread of disease to non-Indigenous settlers. This only reinforced racial segregation and oppression. The belief that the Aboriginal peoples were racially inferior, and with the hope that they would eventually die out, only led to harsher laws being put into place throughout the late 19th and early 20th century. These laws included separation of mixed-race individuals from their communities, the removal of Aboriginal children from their families and homes, and ultimately placing the Indigenous peoples under government control. The impact of these historical, social, and economic invasions, many Indigenous families have and continue to experience intergenerational trauma, poverty, and ongoing social struggles today. Government policies and the way that they played out in the Indigenous community, such as land dispossession, forced assimilation, and racial discrimination, have had a long-term effect on how Indigenous people access and trust healthcare, education, and support today.
So, what does work? When addressing suicide amongst young Indigenous peoples, we need to take into account how important holistic healing is in culture. By doing this, we acknowledge that well being is defined by social, emotional, cultural, and community connectedness, spirituality, and self determination. In recognizing this, as we have learned throughout this unit, Aboriginal health in Aboriginal hands is the most successful approach to reducing suicide among Indigenous youth, as well as almost any health issue among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Aboriginal controlled health services are 23% better at attracting and retaining Aboriginal clients than mainstream health services, and in this, the primary factor for success is cultural safety. Research suggests that Aboriginal-led programs, particularly those delivered by Aboriginal community-controlled health services that provide their services via Aboriginal staff, sustain better rapport, connection, and trust, reducing anxiety and improving attendance to well-being appointments, acceptance of treatment, and help. What doesn't work? Victoria is the only state that has developed a separate whole-of-government approach to Indigenous youth suicide prevention. In saying this, programs developed from a one-size-fits-all perspective have proved ineffective. Interventions that lack cultural awareness and incorporation do not attract Indigenous peoples nor help them in the way they truly need. Approaches to Indigenous programs aimed at combating suicide that are government-led often lack cultural safety, understanding, and awareness, not taking into account intergenerational trauma and the history of colonization, discrimination, and systematic racism that Indigenous peoples have endured, contributing to most of the mental health issues amongst youth. In order to reduce and combat youth suicide, we as an inclusive society need to leave Aboriginal health in Aboriginal hands.
Our chosen mental health program offered by Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation is the Marley District Aboriginal Services. MDAS is the leading service provider for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in northwest Victoria, delivering sustainable services and empowering the local community and supporting their right to self-determination. MDAS purpose is to enhance the overall health and well-being of the local community through healing, support, and protection. The organisation provides a range of health and well-being support services, including mental health and youth programs. Psychological counselling is offered to individuals aged 16 and older, and their support services deliver timely responses that focus on early intervention and prevention. Counselling is available to those who may be struggling with anxiety or depression, life challenges, or drug and alcohol problems. MDAS is involved with the Culture Care Connect program, a community-led initiative developed by the National Aboriginal Community Control Organisation, which focuses on the prevention of suicide and providing culturally sensitive support to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be struggling with their mental health. The program operates out of more than 40 ATCHOs across Australia, employing local community members to support their own people. The program aims to provide individuals with the support and help they need and want while creating an environment where trauma is acknowledged and healing is achieved. The Culture Connect model of care acts as a framework for local and regional suicide prevention planning, as well as the delivery of aftercare services. In conclusion, Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander communities experience significantly higher suicide rates compared to non-Indigenous Australians, particularly Indigenous youth. This disparity arises from the history of incarceration, intergenerational trauma, discrimination, and forced displacements. Programs like MDAS and Culture Care Connect highlight the importance of the prevention of suicide and the need to support local Indigenous communities. Addressing these issues through culturally sensitive community-led initiatives is crucial for supporting and healing Aboriginal communities and their mental health.